Okay, today we are going to be in Chapter 1, Section 8, Multiplying and Dividing Real Numbers. Our topic objective for today is to multiply and divide integers and rational numbers. Multiplication and division of real numbers. First, we're going to talk about the sign of the product rule. This means the product of two numbers with like signs is a positive number, and also the product of two numbers with unlike signs is a negative number. What this means is if we have a negative times a negative, we're going to get a positive. If we have a negative times a positive, we're going to get a negative. If we have a positive times a negative, we're going to get a negative. And if we have a positive times a positive, we're going to get a positive. So let's do an example. If we have 4 times negative 3, that's going to be a positive number times a negative number, so our answer is going to be negative. And then 4 times 3 is 12. If you're looking at B, we have 0 times 6. Anything times 0 is going to give us 0. And it doesn't matter if that's a positive or a negative because 0 is neither. If you're looking at C, we have negative 9 times negative 8. So we have a negative times a negative, and that is going to give us a positive answer. 9 times 8 is 72. Example D, we have negative 8 times 0. Again, 0 is neither negative nor positive, so our answer is just regular 0. For example E, we have a negative 3 times a positive 10. So we have a negative times a positive, so our answer will be negative. 3 times 10 is 30, so we have a negative 30. Last example, F, we have negative 4 times negative 4. Negative times negative, that would be a positive, so we have 4 times 4, which will be 16. If you need extra practice on multiplication, I recommend strongly memorizing your multiplication tables from 1 to 12. That will help you through these assignments so that you don't have to rely on your calculators. Now there is a word of caution. It is very easy to mix up subtraction and multiplication problems. Negative 3 minus 5 is not the same as negative 3 times negative 5. Notice the parentheses. And another example is 2 minus 4 is not the same as 2 times negative 4. Notice again the parentheses. We put the second number that we were multiplying by in parentheses so that we don't get this mistake. So when we're doing subtraction, we have negative 3 minus 5, which equals negative 8. And negative 2 minus 4, which will give us negative 6. But when we're multiplying, we have negative 3, and then in parentheses we have our minus 5. That's a negative and a negative, so that will give us a positive, and then 3 times 5 will give us 15. Again, down on the second one, we have 2 times a negative 4, not minus 4. And so that's a positive times a negative, and that will give us a negative 8. So that's just something to be aware of, especially if you're copying problems from your homework down to paper to work on it. Make sure you put the multiplication sign or parentheses when you're doing that. Okay, let's talk about the sign of the quotient rule. The quotient of two numbers with the like signs is a positive number. The quotient of two numbers with like signs, with unlike signs is a negative number. What this says is if we have a negative divided by a negative, we're going to get a positive answer. If we have a negative divided by a positive, we're going to get a negative answer. If we have a positive divided by a negative, we will get a negative answer. And if we have a positive divided by a positive, then we are going to get a positive answer. The sign of the quotient rule is the exact same as the sign of the product rule. It's just with quotients you're dividing and with products you're multiplying. So let's do a couple of examples using this. So we have a positive 9 divided by a negative 3. So that's positive divided by negative, and that will give us a negative answer. And 9 divided by 3 is a 3. For B, we have a negative 56 divided by a negative 8. So it's a negative divided by a negative. That will give us a positive answer. And then 56 divided by 8 is 7. For example C, we have a negative 30 divided by 5. So that's a negative divided by a positive. So that would give us a negative answer. And then 30 divided by 5 will give us 6. For example D, we have a negative 35 over 7. So that's a negative over a positive. So that will give us a negative answer. And then 35 divided by 7 is 5. For example E, we have a negative 48 over a negative 8, which will give us a positive answer because it's negative divided by a negative. And then 48 divided by 8 is 6. In our last example, we have 24 over a negative 6. So we have a positive over a negative, which will give us a negative. And then 24 divided by 6 is 4. Okay, multiplication versus division. This is exactly what I was just saying. If you have like signs, we'll give you positive products and quotients, and unlike signs will give you negative products and quotients. So if you have a positive times a positive, you're going to get a positive. If you have a positive divided by a positive, you're going to get a positive. So this is just another table to show you those rules. Again, if this one makes more sense to you, then I would use this one. Negative signs and denominators. Okay, if A and B represent any real numbers and B does not equal 0, then A over negative B equals negative A over B, which also equals the negative out front, A over B. We generally do not write fractions with a negative sign in the denominator. Example F on our division page was 24 over negative 6, and we generally don't write it that way. So a fraction, here's a good example. The fraction 5 over negative 9 would be written as either negative 5 over 9 or as the negative out front and then 5 over 9. Your homework will count off if you leave it written 5 over negative 9 on some of your problems. So you need to get in the habit of moving that negative either up to the numerator or out in front of your fraction. Okay, dividing with 0. This is kind of a special case of division with the real numbers. It says if A represents any real number except 0, then 0 divided by A equals 0 over A, which equals 0. So if you take any number and divide 0 by it, or 0 divided by it, then you're going to get 0. Now division by 0 is undefined. We're not allowed to do that. Okay, let's open up your homework for section 1.8 and let's work a problem or two. I'm going to jump ahead to number 7 because I know I want to work number 7 with you. If you look at number 7, we are multiplying more than two numbers together. So here's my suggestion. I recommend multiplying the first two and multiplying the second two, and then you'll multiply those two numbers that you get as a result together. I will work through this one with you. We have a negative 3 times the negative 7, which will give you a positive 21. And then if you look at your other two numbers, you have a 5 times a negative 1, so that will give you a negative 5. So now you have 21 times negative 5, so you have a positive number times a negative number. That will give you a negative number, and then you have 21 times 5, which will give you 105 as your final answer. So you go over to your answer box and you type in negative 105, hit enter, and we got it right. So you just do one multiplication at a time, and you just make sure that your signs turn out. At the very beginning of this problem, we could look and see we had 1, 2, 3 negatives. If you have an odd number of negative signs, your answer will be negative. If you have an even number of negative signs in your problem when it's multiplying or dividing, you will have a positive answer. Let's jump ahead and see if we should do another problem. I'm skipping some of these. Okay, let's do the word problem. This is number 10 in your homework. It says Oswald Sporting Goods marked $5 off the price of each baseball bat in stock. If there are 190 bats in stock, write the total reduction in price of all bats as an integer. What is the total reduction in price? So we have 190 bats, and they're each going to get deducted by $5. So is that $5 going to be a positive or a negative? It's going to be a negative. So we're taking negative 5 times 190. So that's a negative times a positive, so our answer is going to be negative. And then 5 times 190 will give us 950. Let's hit enter, and we got it right. This is one of the only times in a word problem where it's going to have a dollar sign out front and you're going to have a negative. That's a little bit confusing, and so you have to read through it to see that it's wanting a negative answer. Those are the only problems I'm going to work with you. Good luck on your homework and on your quizzes.